Good morning, all of you. Welcome to Ansarkari. So in this video, we are going to discuss the important articles for the 23rd of January 2023. So the first article is regarding the revision of the EXIM data, that is basically the export and imports data. And the revised estimates, they now show that trade deficit, it has narrowed down by $10 billion. So which is, we can say, the data, it is showing huge discrepancies. And in this table, you can have a look how the data estimates have changed over a period of time with different revision exercises. And again, the hotly debated issue regarding the escalating tensions between the executive and the judiciary over the collegium system. So the Union Law Minister, he endorses the former High Court judge's view that top court, it hijacked the constitution. So basically, the High Court judge, he had to say that the top court could not frame the laws as it did not have the right to do so, which is absolutely right. It is the judiciary has the power of judicial review and not the power to frame the laws, except certain circumstances. So only Parliament will amend the constitution. But here, I feel that the Supreme Court, for the first time, it hijacked the constitution, and after hijacking, the Supreme Court said that we will appoint the judges ourselves and the government will have no role in it. So basically, the Union Law Minister is saying that he's basically suggesting that member from the union government must be present in the collegium where the High Court judges are appointed. So that is his demand. And again, this issue is being going on since a number of days, and he has to say that actually majority of the people have similar same views, and it's only those people who disregard the provisions of the constitution and mandate, or the people think that they are above the constitution of India. So again, yesterday also we saw in the Financial Express that constitutional institutions are against constitution, which is an irony, we can say. And let's move forward. From the editorial page, here we'll be talking about the financial problems regarding the Indian urbanization policies and what are the other challenges and drawbacks or the loopholes in our urbanization policies. So recently, a report by the World Bank has been released on financing India's urban infrastructural needs, which focuses on the private investments ameliorating the urban problems. So because of increasing private investments, the report says that it is furthering the urban problems, and there has been push to attract more of private capital since 1990s when we undertook the LPG reforms, which was followed by the urban reforms as well, and it included the smart city mission. So has the reform process really been able to attract the private capital to the urban infrastructure or not is the question. So we see that after 3 decades of reforms, urban finance predominantly it comes from the government sector and not the private sector. So public private partnership projects, they contribute only 3%, and commercial debt at 2%, and 48% is contributed by the central government, 24% by the state, and 15% by the city governments. So that's how the share is. So major proportion when we talk about finances for the urban development comes from the government sector and not through private investment or the private capital. So we'll be looking at what are the results or what does this report of World Bank says. So it says, and it estimates that nearly $840 billion, which is close to 70 lakh crore rupees, is needed, and around $55 billion would be required annually when we talk about urban infrastructural development in India. And when we talk about certain flagship programs that has been launched by the government, so that includes Smart City Mission, then we have Amrut. So Amrut stands for the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, and then we have Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. But when we look at the total outlay for all these schemes combined, which is not more than rupees 2 lakh crore, so that is far too short, we can say, of what the World Bank estimates say. So the core idea of the report and the solutions that is suggested includes improving the fiscal base and credit worthiness of the Indian cities. So this is one reform measure that has been suggested by the report, that we need to improve and expand the fiscal base and credit worthiness of the Indian cities. So that in simpler terms means increasing the property taxes, user fees, and service charges. And also, it points out that nearly 85% of the government revenue is from the cities. So, the point is, even by enhancing the tax base, will it be sufficient to meet the rising demands of the urban infrastructure in the cities? So, that is not possible. And here the answer is that it will not. So, what are the other alternatives available then that we need to implement? So, that includes the basic problem with this report and other reports has been that they are made using a top to bottom approach. So, too much of focus on technocratic solutions, technocentric solutions, which are obviously very high capital intensive technologies. But for the urban context, the plans they must be made from below, so the approach should be bottom to top approach by engaging with the people and identifying their needs, and secondly empowering the city governments and the people at large. So national task force recently it reviewed the 74th constitutional amendment act of 1992. So it gave certain suggestions that included empowering the people, transferring subjects to the city governments, suggesting that 10% of the income tax collected from the cities that should be given back to them for their development further and for further, we can say, reinvestment. And another important aspect of the urban infrastructure is linked to the urban governance, so which is in shambles in most part of the country. So this is the third reform, and regular elections should be held in cities, and they must be empowerment through the transferring of three F's. So 3F includes finances, functions, and functionaries. So this can be cited in your answers, and they become the three keywords. So 3F, finances, functions, and functionaries, and regular elections should be there. So three reforms are there, and an improved urban legal framework that includes a stable and certain fiscal transfer regime, includes financial powers to the urban local bodies, along with attendant rules and regulations. So this will determine the medium to long-term scale of investment flows for the urban infrastructure. And looking at the Shimla example, so here we saw that the Shimla Waterworks, it was transformed into a single utility in 2016-17, which was called the Greater Shimla Water Supply and Sewerage Circle under the Shimla Municipal Corporation. So this was formed and this was under the municipal corporation, and the World Bank, it rendered a soft loan for urban development, but we see that in 2017-18 this body it was changed, its character was changed to a company, and it was formed as the Shimla Jal Prabandhan Nigam Limited. Now it was run under a board of directors because it is a company, it was transformed into a company, and that was outside the ambit of the municipality. So that's how we can say the nature was changed, and the funds that was provided by the World Bank was given to the Shimla Municipal Corporation. So such machinations, they shall not serve the purpose, and it will be perilous to the entire purpose of the urbanization in India. And obviously, the report is a reminder of the tragedy which Indian urbanization is witnessing, that is policy paralysis from the top. And the best example or the best learning we get is from the situation in Joshimath, and that is there. So we need to keep moving forward with the learnings and not repeat the same mistakes in future. Then here, from the perspective of the higher education and India taking the leadership of G20. So it is time for Indian universities to join the world. So India's academic system, it is now the world's second largest, and as articulated in our National Education Policy of 2020, so the country is actively pursuing reform and improvements when we talk about the educational sector. So opening to the world means that making India more visible on the global academic scene, and also learning about and implementing the best practices from abroad should be considered. And definitely G20 leadership is an excellent opportunity for us. And one of the priority areas in education during G20's presidency includes strengthening research and promoting innovations through richer collaboration. So India is in a particularly advantageous position. So the first is that the world sees India as an increasingly important economy and geopolitical player. And secondly, India also plays an important role in higher education, mainly as an exporter of students and talent in many scientific fields, specifically when we talk about their higher education. And also, one of the world's most complex and little understood academic environments is that of the India's academic system, and its higher education sector is fragmented. It is inflexible with tight subject boundaries and of uneven quality. So these are the issues, and the national education policy focus upon consolidation, and it is there with the goal of bringing flexibility and multidisciplinary education and improving the quality of education, apart from emphasizing on vocational education also. So India has set up the National Institutional Ranking Framework, and which has helped fuel competition among the institutions. So when we talk about the scientific publications, they improved from the seventh position in 2010 in the to the third position by 2020. So over a period of 10 years, when we talk about India's global ranking in scientific publications, it is improved from seventh to third place. Then when we talk about ranking in terms of the number of PhDs awarded in science and engineering, so even there India has been ranked third. And in case of global innovation index, so our ranking is improved significantly from 81, which was there in 2014, to now 40 rank in 2022. So Indian universities, they have not scored well in the global rankings. So for India to catch up both in the rankings and in reality, it will take significant investment over a sustained period of time. And in comparison, China, over decades, it has invested billions of dollars to improve its top universities. So we lag when we talk about global rankings. So that is one area that needs more attention. And there are elements of India's academic environment that are distinctive and they're worth highlighting to an international audience. So that includes dozen top quality non-profit private universities being set up, mostly funded by the philanthropically minded Indians. Then India has more than 100 research laboratories in diverse areas, which are sponsored by the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research and other central government agencies. And when we talk about the leadership, so India's universities and its scientific prowess are an important part of soft power strategy, and the internationalization initiatives outlined in the national education policy is an important start. So two interesting initiatives they have been suggested. One is a conference in India of leaders of universities in the G20 countries, and secondly is the creation of a prestigious scholarship program. Similarly, China's version of the scholarship program is called the China Scholarship Council, and all this will take careful planning, sustained resources, support from the central and the state governments, and an expanded international consciousness in the Indian academic community. So this was entire thing about India's higher education and promoting it at the global scale. Now, again, talking about the exports and imports, specifically with China. So in 2022, India's imports from China touched a record high. Yes, our imports from China, they have touched a record high, while the exports to China, they fell to a 5-year low, which is definitely not in favor of India. And this imbalance has further widened the trade deficit with China. So when we talk about main goods that we're importing or for which we're dependent upon China, that includes majorly the electrical machinery and the mechanical appliances. They were the most imported goods by India from China, and India's dependency on China for such goods, it has remained high for quite some time now. But even when we talk about the BRICS nations, their dependency on China is also increasing. So it is not just that India, but in case of other economies, specifically India's neighborhood and the BRICS nation, their dependency on China is also increasing. So here beautifully the data has been given in the form of graphs. So we'll be having a look at each one of them. So firstly, we'll look at the graph of the trend behind the rising imports from China. So here the graph is showing the China's share in India's imports as a percentage. So it has been increasing. It was increasing up till, we can say, 2016. After that, it started declining, but again, because of COVID-19, it increased, and now it is like showing that it is falling. So the percentage share of imports from China is at 14.2%. Then looking at the trend of exports. So exports were increasing from 2016. They increased up till 2020, but because of COVID-19, they fell and they have like sharply declined. So they have decreased from about 7% in 2020 to 3.4% in 2022. And this is the lowest level in 5 years. Then most exported items to China from India includes majorly ores, slag, and ash. Then it includes iron ores and concentrates. Then we have petroleum oils are exported, semi-finished, and ferrochromium is exported. Then we have shrimps and prawns, and basically under the fish, mollusks, and aquatic invertebrates. And we have salt, sulfur, and stones. So these are the major things that are exported by India to China. And major imports we have already seen includes under the category of electrical machinery and equipments and machinery and mechanical appliances. So under that, we have electronic integrated circuits. We have semiconductor devices are majorly imported. We have laptops. We have organic chemicals, which includes antibiotics. We have fertilizer, that is urea. So all these things are imported from China. And talking about country-wise dependency, so specifically here, the data has been given between 2011 to 2021. So how the dependency over China has changed when we talk about different countries. So if in case of USA, the dependency is not changed. It remains unchanged at 18%. Russia's dependency is increased. We see Pakistan's, Bangladesh, rest every other country's dependency is increased over China. South Africa, we have Nepal, Sri Lanka, United Kingdom. So all these countries, they are depending more upon China when we look at the figures for 2021, except for USA. So here the share remains at 18.5%. And here, like for each and every item that is imported from China, their individual pattern has been given. So you can have a look at how semiconductor dependence that is increasing. So we need to develop this sector domestically. Electronic integrated circuits, they have sharply increased. Urea imports, they were earlier declining, but again, it is increasing. And telephone sets and parts, it was also started, like it had started to decline, but again, now it is on the upside. So that's how basically how beautifully it has been explained, and it must be clear to all of you. When we talk about the foreign portfolio investors, they have pulled out equities in January. So that is mainly because of opening up of the Chinese economy, and secondly, because of the concerns about the US economy entering a recession. So these are the main reasons why foreign capital is moving out of India. And definitely that is adding pressure over the Indian rupee. Then we see rise in attempts to revive the militancy in Punjab. And here basically there was 57th All India Conference of Director Generals and Inspector Generals of Police, which was organized by the Intelligence Bureau. So firstly, we'll be looking at what are the rising security challenges when we talk about Punjab or other bordering states with Pakistan. So we see that post 2015, there has been a rise in attempts by the state and the non-state actors from Pakistan and the extremist elements based in Western countries to destabilize and revive militancy in Punjab. Then the subject of discussion was Khalistan extremism, communication and logistic networks, and the role of Pakistan in aiding and sheltering the Khalistani terrorists that has increased, that was highlighted, and the effective use of the law, that is the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, against the terror suspects was also cited. So you should be knowing about what are the laws when we talk about dealing with terrorist and the terrorist activities. So one is UAPA. Then when we look at the misuse of the drone technology, so drones are being used to drop the consignments of narcotics, arms, and ammunition in Punjab from across the border. And one of the disturbing trends in the past 3 years is the nexus between organized criminal gangs and the fugitive terrorists, which are further bolstered by the narco trafficking gangs. So they are working, we can say, together, and the nexus between all three of them is growing. So that is the trend of the past 3 years. And even the jail gangsters, they're recruiting and they're planning attacks from prisons. That was also a cause of concern, because definitely they do have access to mobile phones inside the jail, and that's how they remain connected with the outside world. and they can easily plan attacks. And what our prime minister has to say, so he was also addressing this conference, and he said he called for prison reforms and repealing the obsolete laws. So prime minister suggested making the police forces more sensitive and training them in emerging technologies. Then we have national data governance framework for smoothing of the data exchange across the agencies. Then while we should further leverage the technological solutions like biometrics, but there is also a need to further strengthen the traditional policing mechanisms like the foot patrols. And he also recommended repealing the obsolete criminal laws and building standards for the police organizations across states, and strengthening of the border as well as the coastal security by organizations through frequent visits of officials. And he also called for emphasized cooperation between the state police and the central agencies, so more cooperation, and replicating the model of the conference at the state and the district level also to minutely identify the emerging challenges and evolving the best practices among their teams. So these are all the suggestions by our prime minister. And economy is at risk from move to clean energy. How? So we see that India's financial sector is highly exposed to the risk of the economy transitioning from being largely dependent on the fossil fuel to clean energy. So how, or we can say, what are the risks when we are talking about transitioning to clean energy? Because the funds allocation tells us about it, and we see that 60% of the lending goes to the mining sector was for oil and gas extraction, and while one-fifth of the manufacturing sector debt is for petroleum refining and related industries. So you can see that major part and major proportion of the funds is being allocated to the sectors which are not green in nature. So even electricity production accounted for 5.2% of the outstanding credit. So that is, we can say, a major risk when we talk about transitioning towards clean energy, because the funds are not being allocated for green projects or green energy on like majority basis. So there is a shortage of experts in India's financial institutions who had the expertise to appropriately advise the institutions on such a transition. So we lack financial experts. Then only 4 of the 10 major financial institutions which were surveyed collected information on environmental, social, and governance risk, that is ESG risk, and these firms, they do not systematically incorporate that data into the financial planning. So this needs to be incorporated into the financial planning. We need financial experts for this sector, and the financials, the regulators, and the policymakers in the emerging and the developing economies, they should be acting swiftly to ensure an orderly transition to the net zero economy. So when we talk about what are the challenges, what are the targets for India? So firstly, we have the target of being net zero by 2070. Then we have also announced plans to source half of our electricity needs from the non-fossil fuels by 2030. And mapping India's policy commitments against these lending and the investment pattern, it reveals that the India's financial sector is heavily exposed to the potential transition risk. And high carbon industries, which includes power generation industry, chemicals, iron and steel, and aviation, they account for 10% of the outstanding debt to Indian financial institutions. And coal currently accounts for 44% of the India's primary energy sources, 44%, and 70% of the power generation comes from only coal. 70% of it is coming only from coal. So right now we can say we are hugely dependent upon coal. So this needs to come down, and India has much higher electricity from carbon sources than the world average, despite its vast potential for the cheap solar, wind, and solar hydro power. So we need to tap in these advantages and the potential that we have when we talk about transitioning towards clean energy. Now we'll take up the Financial Express. So in case of Financial Express, we'll be looking at the fertilizer sector. So here you can see how the trend has changed in case of fertilizer subsidy that has been provided by the government. So it has been increasing constantly since 2019-20 to 2022-23, and it is expected that it will come down in the financial year 2023-24. So to reduce our dependence upon fertilizer imports, the government it is likely to make available the nano diammonium phosphate and a mix of single superphosphate and urea to farmers from the next Kharif season. And more than half of our country's DAP requirements, they are imported. More than half of it is imported. And the main sources are from West Asian economies and Jordan. So while India imports about 25% of its annual consumption of urea. So we also talk about biofertilizers. So even that is being emphasized by the government so as to reduce our dependence upon the imports in case of fertilizers. And also that would also help in rationalizing the fertilizer subsidy. So coming to the editorial section, so here we'll be having a look at the data regarding the government debt and the pattern that's like how it has been changing. So we see that the public debt to GDP ratio, it is uncomfortably high at 85%. This is because of the COVID-19 that government had to undertake a huge amount of expenditure, and we see that the public debt to GDP ratio, it has climbed up at 85%, and this calls for urgency to consolidate the fiscal, basically to go ahead with fiscal consolidation. And it is important in these challenging times to ensure that debt is at sustainable levels. Especially, it should be close to 50% of the center's next tax revenues are being used to service the interest bill. So close to 50% of the entire center's net tax revenue, they go in providing the interest that government has to pay over its debt. So that is, we can say that it forms the major proportion of center's expenditure. So obviously this is a revenue expenditure by the government, and it constitutes 50% of the share of the government's expenditure from its net tax revenues. And the government spending mix, it has improved over the years. So the ratio of revenue expenditure, the capital expenditure, that is expected to improve to 4.5 from 5.3% in financial year 2022, and 7% it was there like in financial year 2020. So we see that the ratio of the revenue expenditure to capital expenditure, that is improving, so it is coming down. So we are seeing that revenue expenditure has been declining and capital expenditure has been increasing. So in the current year, the expenditure on food and fertilizer subsidies, that has jumped way beyond the targets. That is because of high global prices of fertilizers following the Russia-Ukraine hostilities, because majorly we import our fertilizer from Russia, and that has been the major reason behind obviously increase in the prices of fertilizers and increasing the fertilizer subsidy bill. So free food grains scheme has also been restructured by the government, so that is going to help in reducing the food subsidy bill to about rupees 2 trillion. And the focus on infrastructure creation would no doubt it will continue, and that will increase the capital expenditure little over by rupees 8 trillion, and that will be driven by spending and by launching more projects for roads and railways. So that is the data, so you can cite it at relevant place. And that's all for today. Thank you for joining Ansarkari. You'll get the PDF link in the description box, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video as much as possible. Thank you so much for joining us.